A corrupt bully brutally struck a 72-year-old widow inside a crowded diner, knocking her to the icy floor as coffee cups rattled, and every soul in the room froze in terror. He laughed, like a self-appointed king of a dying little town, believing no one could challenge him, believing fear was his crown and cruelty his shield. But he made a mistake so fatal it would shatter his illusion of power forever, because the widow he assaulted was the mother of a Navy SEAL. And at that exact moment, her son and his trained German Shepherd partner were stepping through the door, boots crunching snow, carrying the storm with them. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. The air in Winterdale, Minnesota, carried a sharp whisper of early winter. Frost clung to the pine branches like silver threads, and dawn spread pale gold across the frozen lake. The cold smelled of pine, old wood, and quiet prayers whispered into the wind. This was the fragile peace Martha Hayes had clung to all her life, a peace about to be shattered by the darkness hidden beneath her small town's snow-covered streets. Chapter 1. The bitter wind over Winterdale. The winter wind scraped across the streets of Winterdale, Minnesota, a sharp, metallic cold that rattled window panes and chased people indoors. Martha Hayes pushed open the door of the North Star Diner, her thin frame shivering beneath a faded brown winter coat that had seen more winters than she could count. At 73, she was a woman softened by years of quiet endurance, gray hair pinned in a loose knot, pale skin lined with the delicate etchings of time, and gentle hazel eyes that still held a spark of kindness even after life had taken so much. She wasn't here for long conversations or a warm welcome, just a cup of cheap hot coffee, something to thaw the ache in her hands. The diner smelled of maple syrup and burnt toast, a familiar perfume in a town where everything was worn but honest. A handful of locals sat scattered across the booths. They nodded at Martha out of habit but didn't smile. In a small town where poverty was almost inherited, kindness often came second to quiet self-preservation. Martha found a corner booth, rubbing her hands together, waiting for the warmth to creep back into her fingers. As she rested her palms on the cup, the waitress brought her, Julie May, a tired young mother with freckles and a distracted air. She felt a rare moment of peace settle over her. Just a moment, just enough to breathe, but the peace cracked the moment Derek Holt walked in. Derek was the kind of man Winterdale had learned to step around. A thick-set bull of a man in his mid-40s, he carried the heavy swagger of someone who mistook intimidation for authority. His beard was uneven and dark, his eyes small and restless, darting around like something caged too long. Years of temper problems, and a father who taught to get in fists before words, had carved him into a creature of loud cruelty. He was known for handling problems, for people who paid him in cash and silence. Today, his problem was Martha. "Well, look who's gracing the diner with her charity case presents," Derek sneered loudly. His boots thudded across the linoleum as he marched toward her booth. Conversations around the room fell into terrified silence. Martha stiffened, fingers tightening around the warm ceramic cup. She lifted her head slowly, trying not to let her fear show. "Morning, Derek," she said softly. "I don't want trouble." "That's the thing, Martha," he said, leaning one hand on her table. "Trouble's what you make. You're holding up progress. That little shack of yours by the pines, folks are saying it's ruining the view. Developers want it, and you," he jabbed a thick finger toward her, "are standing in the way." Martha's heart beat unevenly. She had lived in that little house for 40 years, raised her son there, buried her husband there. It was everything she had left. "It's my home, Derek," she murmured. "I'm not selling." "Not selling," he mocked. "Because you think you're better than everyone? We're trying to clean up this town, and your falling-apart cottage is the first thing that needs to go." Martha swallowed, trying to steady her voice. "You don't have the right to harass me." His face flushed, a dangerous red rising up his neck. Derek wasn't used to being spoken back to, especially not by someone he viewed as powerless. Across the diner, Julie May froze behind the counter, her young face tightening. An older man in a booth lowered his gaze to his plate. No one dared get between Derek and his target. In Winterdale, survival meant silence. Martha forced herself to breathe. Inside her chest, something fragile trembled. Not fear exactly, but exhaustion. She thought of her son Ethan, thousands of miles away, a man shaped by war and responsibility. She rarely allowed herself to miss him aloud, but in moments like this, she wished he were here, just to stand between her and the storm. Derek leaned closer, his breath warm and sour. "This town doesn't need people like you. You're just dragging everyone down." Martha felt a sharp sting of humiliation, but she kept her chin lifted. "Let me drink my coffee, Derek, please." And the word, please, was the spark. In a sudden motion dripping with cruelty and pent-up rage, Derek swept the cup off the table. It shattered against the floor, coffee splashing across her shoes. Martha gasped, instinctively pulling back. Her heart lurched. She didn't understand how a man could hate someone who posed no threat at all. Then came the blow. His hand cracked across her cheek with a sound that split the diner open. The force wasn't overwhelming, but the shock toppled her. Martha's heel caught the leg of the booth, and she fell, her frail body collapsing onto the cold tile floor. Pain flashed briefly across her brow as her head struck the edge of the table leg. For a moment, no one breathed. The diner fell into a soundless vacuum, fear swallowing every voice. Martha blinked up at the blurry ceiling lights, her cheek throbbing, her breath shaky. Shame flooded her more than pain. She felt small, so terribly small, and she wondered, was this what Winterdale had become? A place where a widow could fall and no one dared lift her? Then, a sound, low, deep, controlled. A single bark filtered in through the diner's frosted window, so soft it almost blended with the whistling wind, but sharp enough to feel like a warning. Derek's head snapped toward the door. Footsteps crunched in the snow outside. A broad shadow moved past the window. Someone, or something, was approaching, but whether they would reach her in time, no one inside knew. And the chapter ends there. Chapter 2. The sun who returned through the snow, the door of the North Star Diner swung open as a gust of winter wind curled inside, scattering flecks of snow across the floor. A tall figure stepped through, framed by the pale morning light like a silhouette carved from cold steel in memory. Ethan Hayes paused just inside the doorway. He was a man of 40, broad-shouldered beneath a navy winter coat that bore the faint creases of long deployments. His jaw was angular, marked with the shadow of a neatly trimmed beard, dusted by a few early streaks of gray. A black knit beanie sat snug over his short, dark hair, and on it gleamed a small metallic pin, U.S. Army veteran. His injury, a lingering ache in his left knee from an explosion overseas, gave his steps a slight stiffness, but nothing that dulled the quiet force in his presence. His eyes, deep, controlled, dark brown, swept the diner in one sharp, assessing motion. Then he saw her. Martha lay on the cold tile floor, one hand braced against a table leg, the other trembling slightly. Her cheek was flushed red from Derek's strike. For a heartbeat, Ethan's world narrowed to a single point of focus, a silent, suffocating pressure in his chest. Standing near her was Derek Holt. Derek's posture shifted the moment he recognized Ethan. His smirk faltered, replaced by a sudden rigidity. Even a bully understood when something larger, something dangerous, had entered the room. Behind Ethan, stepping in from the drifting snow, came Ranger. Ranger was a 5-year-old German shepherd in peak condition, sleek black and tan coat, chest broad, amber eyes sharp with intelligence. His harness, matte black with white block letters reading, "Service Dog, Do Not Pet," clung securely to his muscled frame. Ranger moved with a soldier's discipline, his gait smooth and precise, his senses flicking rapidly across the room. The diner fell into a heavy stillness. "Watch," Ethan murmured, barely a breath. Ranger flowed forward, lowering into a poised, ready stance in front of Martha. His ears perked, body angled protectively, gaze locked onto Derek with a calm that felt far more threatening than any snarl. He didn't bark. He didn't lunge. He simply existed like an unspoken promise of consequence. Ethan crossed the room in 3 long strides. "Mama," he said softly, kneeling beside her. His voice changed, gentler than anyone in the diner had ever heard from him. "Can you sit up?" Martha blinked at him through the blur. "Ethan, you're home?" "Yes," he breathed. "I'm here." He slid an arm under her shoulders, lifting her with ease born from training and love. The sight of the bruise forming on her cheek tightened something deep and dangerous inside him. Only when she was seated safely did Ethan rise to face Derek. The diner's patrons watched with silent desperation, huddled in their booths, uncertain whether they were witnessing the start of a rescue or the beginning of something far darker. Derek swallowed, straightening his shoulders in a forced show of bravado. "This isn't what it looks like." Ethan didn't blink. "It's exactly what it looks like." His voice was calm, too calm, steady as winter ice laid over a running river. Derek took a half step back. He didn't know Ethan personally, but he knew the type. Men who returned from war with a gaze that held more truth than threats ever could. Julie May, the young waitress with freckled cheeks and tired eyes, edged closer from behind the counter. She had always been quick and quiet, a woman carrying the fatigue of raising a child alone. Now she looked at Ethan with barely hidden gratitude and fear. "Sir," she whispered, I have a recording. I didn't mean to." "You did the right thing," Ethan said without turning toward her. His tone gentled, but only for her. Derek's fists tightened. "Look, this town is trying to grow. Her old house is in the way. That's all this is." "That," Ethan replied, "is not a reason to strike someone half your size and twice your age." Outside, the snow continued falling in thick, swirling sheets, muffling the world beyond the diner's thin walls. Inside, tension coiled tighter and tighter, a silent storm of its own. Martha reached for Ethan's sleeve, her voice barely more than a breath. "Ethan, don't let this turn into something worse." He didn't look back, but she felt the brief squeeze of his hand, a promise that he heard her. Derek glanced at the window, at Ranger, at Ethan. The certainty he arrived with had drained from his face. Bullies had rules. They punched downward. But Ethan Hayes wasn't below anyone. He stood like a man carved out of resolve and hard years. The kind of man who had survived things Derek could not begin to understand. A shift moved through the room. People took out their phones, not to interfere, but because the truth had already begun slipping into the digital world. The video Julie May captured flickered through the town within minutes, hopping from screen to screen like sparks in dry grass. Ethan realized it instantly. His jaw tightened with frustration. He had come home hoping for quiet days, for mornings spent walking Ranger by the frozen lake, for evenings sitting beside his mother as the old house creaked in the cold. He had not intended to step back into conflict, not here, not now, but some things choose you. Derek took one more step backward. "This isn't over," he muttered, but even he didn't sound convinced. Ranger let out a soft growl, not threatening, but enough to make Derek flinch. The diner exhaled all at once. Ethan helped Martha to her feet and wrapped his coat around her shoulders. As he did, a faint trembling passed through her hands. She hated that he saw it. She hated even more that Derek had caused it. Ethan guided her toward the door. Behind him, phones continued buzzing as the video spread, pulling Ethan, against his will, into a spotlight he had hoped to leave behind forever. And the chapter ends just as the snow outside swirls harder, as if Winterdale itself had begun whispering that this was only the beginning. Chapter 3. The Secrets Beneath Winterdale. The snow settled deeper that night, layering the rooftops of Winterdale in thick white silence. Yet beneath that quiet blanket, something restless stirred, danger threading through the cold, like a second, sharper wind. Ethan Hayes stood on the narrow porch of his mother's house, breath rising in small clouds. The bruise on Martha's cheek was beginning to fade into a pale purple bloom, but the look in her eyes, worried, unsettled, deepened Ethan's resolve. Ranger lay beside him, shoulders tense, ears shifting with every distant sound. The peaceful home Ethan remembered was gone. In its place stood a house under quiet siege. He had sensed it the moment he returned from the diner. Derek Holt hadn't acted on impulse. There had been intent behind that strike, intent and pressure. Someone had wanted Martha scared. Someone wanted her out. Tonight, Ethan intended to find out who. He moved along the snowy edges of the yard, placing small motion sensors, compact, black, military-grade devices, along the perimeter. His movements were smooth despite the stiffness in his left knee, a lingering injury from a ground blast in Kandahar. He'd learned to ignore the ache years ago, but the cold made it flare, pulsing in steady waves. Ranger followed him closely. The dog's sharp amber eyes scanned the darkness with an alertness born of discipline and instinct. At 5 years old, Ranger was in perfect working shape, broad chest, thick neck, powerful legs built for pursuit. His breath fogged in the cold, but his posture stayed rigid and focused. He didn't play while on duty. He never did. Inside the house, Martha watched her son through the frosted window. Her worry was quiet but heavy. She had remarried grief many times in her life, but she feared losing Ethan to violence more than anything. She couldn't shake the thought that her boy had spent years learning to survive wars, only to face a new one in the town he grew up in. Ethan returned to the porch, brushing snow from his sleeves. "Sensors are up," he said softly. "If anyone comes near the house tonight, I'll know." Martha didn't speak for a moment. Her fingers trembled against the fabric of her sweater. Ethan, why would Derek do this? Why now? He hesitated before answering. Because someone told him to. She closed her eyes. It wasn't an answer she wanted, but it was one she had feared. Later that evening, Ethan sat at the kitchen table, an old wooden thing covered in scratches from years of family dinners. Ranger lay at his feet, head resting on his paws, though his ears stayed raised. It was the closest thing to sleep he ever allowed himself on guard shift. Ethan opened his laptop, an old but well-maintained device, and reviewed the files a friend in Minneapolis had sent him. The friend, Calvin Brooks, was a thin, wiry man in his late 30s with sandy blonde hair kept in a messy bun and a nervous, thoughtful expression. Calvin worked as a freelance records researcher, the type who dug through public data better than most journalists. He wasn't a soldier, but he was brave in his own way, brave with information. Ethan had only asked one question earlier: who benefits if my mother moves? Calvin had replied with something Ethan didn't expect: a PDF file titled Winterdale Development Council, Parcel Acquisition Notes. Scrolling through the documents, Ethan's jaw tightened. Several low-income homes near the Pine Ridge, including Martha's house, had been marked for future resort grounds. The term chilled him. He knew what it meant in practice: harassment, pressure, and accidents meant to convince people to sell for pennies. But what caught Ethan's attention was a name typed neatly at the bottom of a memo: Deputy Mayor Richard Lennox. Ethan leaned back, processing the implications. Lennox was in his mid-50s, a neatly groomed man with a full silver mustache and a habit of adjusting his tie whenever he lied. He had always been polite in public, overly so, but Ethan remembered him from childhood town events. A man whose smile was too practiced, whose compliments felt weighed and measured, as if every kindness had a price. Ethan whispered the name aloud, and Ranger lifted his head, sensing the change in his master's tone. "Yeah," Ethan murmured. "I don't like it either." Before he could dive deeper, Ranger stiffened. Not emotion, just a shift, a subtle, powerful tension rolling across his shoulders. Ethan's hand moved instantly to Ranger's harness. "What is it, boy?" Ranger moved to the front door, nose lifting, sniffing once, twice. His posture sharpened into a rigid silhouette. Ethan stepped toward the window and saw it. A dark SUV idling at the end of their road, engine rumbling beneath the howl of the wind. The vehicle's headlights were dimmed, almost off. Watching, waiting, not a local car, not one that made sense at this hour. They were being observed. Ethan's heartbeat didn't quicken. Years of training kept it steady, but a cold understanding settled inside him. This wasn't just pressure. This was surveillance. He clicked the living room lamp off, bathing the house in darkness. Ranger moved with him, silent but coiled to strike if needed. Then he whispered, "Stay with Mom." Ranger obeyed immediately, returning to Martha's side and sitting protectively beside her chair. His gaze never left the window. Ethan slipped out the back door, boots crunching through the snow, breath rising in careful, tight bursts. He kept low, moving along the side of the house, keeping the SUV in his peripheral vision. But before he could get closer, the SUV's headlights flashed once, like a signal, and the car pulled away, disappearing down the road. Ethan exhaled slowly. Whoever they weren't ready for confrontation. Not yet. They just wanted Ethan to know they were watching. Inside, Martha clutched Ranger's fur, fear trembling in her fingertips. "Ethan, what's happening to this town?" He sat beside her, voice steady, though something cold flickered in his eyes. "It's not the town, Mom. It's the people trying to own it." Outside, the wind howled louder, enough to make the windows tremble. And Ethan understood that Derek's attack at the diner had been merely the first warning. The real storm was only beginning. Chapter 4. The chase through the blizzard night. The storm descended on Winterdale with a violence that felt almost personal. Snow hammered the rooftops in thick, whipping sheets. The wind shrieked against window panes like claws dragging across glass. Streetlights flickered helplessly, their beams swallowed by the swirling white. Inside Martha Hayes' small house, every board creaked under the storm's assault. Ethan stood in the living room, boots laced, coat on, a tactical flashlight in his right hand. Ranger sat by the front door, posture rigid, alert in a way that told Ethan something had shifted outside. Martha, wrapped in a knitted shawl, hovered near the hallway. Her pale, lined face was heavy with fear she tried to hide. "Ethan, maybe it's just the wind." Ranger growled once, low and precise. "No, not the wind." Ethan moved to the window, careful not to disturb the curtains. Through a thin gap, he spotted shadows moving across the yard. Slow, deliberate, too controlled to be drunk wanderers or teenagers out past curfew. 3 men, one of them unmistakably bulky, wearing a hooded jacket pulled low. Derek Holt. Ethan's jaw tightened, but the other 2 were new. One was tall and lanky, maybe mid-30s, wearing a gray parka and a knitted cap pulled tight over blonde hair. His features were narrow, fox-like, with darting eyes that scanned the yard as though expecting trouble. The second was broader. Early 40s, shaved head, a jagged scar cutting across his left cheek. His heavy coat strained against his thick torso. His movements had the rigid discipline of someone who had spent time behind bars. Someone used to violence, not amateurs. "Mom," Ethan whispered, "stay in the back room. Don't come out no matter what happens." Martha nodded, clutching the shawl. "Be careful, Ethan. Please." He gave her a small, steady look, one meant to reassure, but unable to mask the storm inside him. The moment Martha disappeared down the hall, Ranger rose. Ethan knelt, placing a hand on the dog's harness. "Stay close. Watch for the one with the scar." Another low growl, affirmation. A sudden metal clang echoed outside, the back gate. Then, footsteps, fast, heavy, moving across frozen ground toward the porch. Ethan flicked off the interior lights and waited. The first blow hit the front door so hard the frame shook. Another followed. Then a voice, Derek's, slurred by adrenaline and fear. "Open up! We just want to talk!" Ethan didn't bother answering. A window at the side of the house rattled, someone testing the lock. Then Ranger stiffened. In the next instant, Ranger barked, sharp, explosive, the kind that rattled the bones. He lunged for the door as another strike hit the wood. Ethan moved with trained precision, switching his flashlight to a combat grip. When the door gave way with a splintering crack, everything erupted at once. The scarred man charged first, swinging a steel baton, the metal whistling through the air. Ranger dodged, leaping sideways with astonishing speed, planting himself between the intruder and Martha's hallway. Ethan stepped in, blocking the man's second swing with his forearm, absorbing the impact with a grunt. The pain flashed hot, but he shoved it aside. Using the attacker's momentum, Ethan twisted his arm and delivered a sharp strike to the ribs, sending the man stumbling backward. The lanky blonde man rushed in next, wielding a crowbar. Ethan dropped low, sweeping his leg out and knocking the man off balance. The crowbar clattered across the floor. Derek hesitated at the threshold, breath ragged, eyes wild. He hadn't expected resistance. He definitely hadn't expected Ethan Hayes. As the scarred man regained his footing and charged again, Ranger intercepted him, springing forward with a deep, fierce bark. The man swung the baton wildly, but Ranger ducked and pivoted, giving Ethan an opening. Ethan grabbed the man's coat, slammed him against the wall, and pinned his arm behind his back. The baton fell from his hand. The blonde intruder scrambled toward the door, slipping on tracked-in snow. "Derek, we need to go. Now!" But Derek was already running. Fear, hot and choking, overpowered whatever courage he'd pretended to have. He fled across the yard into the blizzard, boots sliding on the icy ground. Ethan didn't hesitate. "Ranger, track!" The dog bounded through the broken doorway into the storm, nose down, paws cutting through deep snow. Ethan grabbed his flashlight and followed, ignoring the sting in his left knee as he pushed into the punishing cold. The blizzard swallowed sound quickly, but Derek's footprints were clear, erratic, slipping, desperate, leading toward the woods near frozen Winterdale Lake. Ranger paused, sniffed the air, then veered right into a narrow trail through the trees. Ethan followed, branches whipped against his coat. Wind slashed across his face. The flashlight beam cut through the white chaos in jittery arcs. Every breath felt sharp, thin. Ahead, a shadow stumbled through the storm. Derek, fighting the snow, panic overtaking him. He glanced back and saw Ethan's silhouette and Ranger's bounding form. "No, no, get away!" he shouted, voice cracking. He tried to run faster but slipped, falling hard onto his hands and knees. Before Ethan could reach him, bright red and blue lights flashed beyond the tree line. State patrol cars, several of them. Sirens muted by the snow, sliding closer like ghosts. A voice boomed through a loudspeaker. "This is Minnesota State Patrol! Stop moving and put your hands up!" Derek froze. Officers emerged, bundled in heavy jackets, badges gleaming beneath headlamps. Leading them was Sergeant Marla Ortiz, a compact Latina woman in her early 40s with sharp cheekbones, tightly braided black hair, and eyes that appraised everything with unyielding clarity. She moved with the steadiness of someone who'd spent 2 decades dealing with people at their worst and still believed in doing things right. "Hands where we can see them," Ortiz barked. Derek lifted his trembling arms. Within minutes, the scene lit up with flashlights, footprints, and swirling snow. Officers cuffed the 2 intruders Ethan left behind in the house, while Ortiz approached Ethan. "You Hayes?" she asked. "We got a 911 call from a neighbor who saw men breaking into your mother's place." "Yeah," Ethan said, breathing hard. "That was them." Ortiz glanced toward Derek, who looked utterly defeated. "We'll handle the rest." The storm raged on, but the fight was over. And as officers loaded Derek into the patrol car, he finally broke. "It wasn't my idea," he shouted. "They told me to scare her. Lennox, he said we had to make her sell." The woods fell silent, and the truth cracked open like ice underfoot. Chapter 5. Dawn over the frozen lake. Morning came quietly to Winterdale, as if the town itself were taking a long, steady breath after weeks of tension. The blizzard had passed, leaving behind a brittle calm. Snow covered the pine woods in layered ivory, and the frozen lake shimmered under the first pale stretch of sunlight. For the first time in days, the air felt different, lighter, though still cold enough to nip at fingertips. The arrests from the night before had shaken Winterdale awake. Deputy Mayor Richard Lennox was taken into custody at dawn, his face pale, lips pinched as officers escorted him from his comfortable office. His polished suits and careful smiles could not shield him anymore. The truth had claws, and it had finally reached him. The other 2 intruders, both bruised, one with his left arm secured in a sling, were already processed. Their mugshots hit the local news before sunrise, and Derek Holt, hollow-eyed and shivering through detoxed fear, had spent the night confessing every detail he knew, desperate to save himself from further charges. By mid-morning, the town council announced emergency suspensions. Investigators moved in. For once, justice wasn't something whispered about. It was visible, marching across Winterdale in official badges and quiet authority. But not everyone was thinking of justice. Inside the North Star Diner, warmth gathered like a small miracle. Tables were rearranged to form a circle. Decorations hung from ceiling beams, paper snowflakes, handwritten thank you banners, even a few children's drawings of a black and tan German shepherd standing heroically beside a tall man in a winter coat. The diner's owner, Helen Crowley, bustled between tables with her usual fire. Helen was a woman in her early 60s with fiery red hair streaked with silver, tied in a loose bun that threatened to fall apart every few minutes. She was sturdy, full-cheeked from years of generous eating and generous living, and known for a voice that carried farther than most church bells. She was brash, loud, but deeply loyal, especially to those who protected her town. "Everyone settle down!" Helen shouted, waving a spatula like a conductor's baton. "We're here to thank the Hayes family, not spill coffee all over each other." A ripple of laughter warmed the diner. Ethan Hayes stood near the counter, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. His navy winter coat hung open, his breath still visible from the cold outside. He looked like someone who'd been carved from discipline and restraint, tall, broad-shouldered, eyes that remained alert even in peace. Beside him, Ranger sat like a disciplined statue, chest broad, fur gleaming under the lights, harness crisp and steady. Children in puffy winter jackets lingered a few feet away, eyes wide with admiration. A little girl in pink earmuffs looked up at Ethan. "Mister, can I pet him?" Ethan's voice was gentle but firm. "Not when he's working." Ranger gave a soft huff, as if in agreement. Martha Hayes stood close to her son, her cheek nearly healed, only a faint yellow bruise left. She wore a simple wool coat, her gray hair brushed and pinned with care. Her face glowed with a pride so deep it softened the lines time had left behind. Helen clapped her hands, interrupting everything. "Okay, folks, quiet down." The diner fell silent, except for the sizzling of bacon from the kitchen. Helen lifted her chin. This town was in trouble, and when trouble came knocking, one family stood between us and ruin. She pointed, dramatically, at Ethan and Ranger. "We owe these two more than a thank you." Applause erupted. People stood. Someone whistled. Ranger straightened his posture, ears perked, unsure why humans clapped so loudly, but accepting the attention with professional dignity. Ethan shifted awkwardly. I just did what anyone would do. No, Martha said softly, loud enough for those around her. You did what a son does, and what a good man chooses to do. The room quieted. Martha reached out, touching Ethan's arm. Her hand was small and fragile, but her voice carried strength. You came home when I needed you most. Ethan swallowed hard, emotion flickering under the steady surface of his expression. The rest of the gathering blurred into warm conversation, clinking mugs and grateful smiles. The storm had passed, and for a moment, Winterdale felt whole. Later that afternoon, Ethan and Martha walked home along the snowy path, Ranger bounding ahead with disciplined joy, occasionally glancing back to ensure they followed. The lake was a great mirror of frozen silver, stretching across the horizon. Sunlight spilled across its surface like molten gold trapped beneath ice. Inside the cozy house, Martha poured 2 cups of coffee, strong, dark, the kind Ethan remembered from childhood. The aroma wrapped around him like a familiar blanket. She handed him a steaming cup and lowered herself into the chair by the window. For a long moment, they watched Ranger settle onto his mat, paws crossed, eyes still tracking shadows outside, ever the sentinel. Martha sighed softly. Ethan, you came just in time that day, didn't you? Ethan stared into his coffee, lips lifting in a faint smile. Maybe, or maybe Ranger heard it all before I did. Ranger lifted his head, as if understanding he'd been mentioned. His amber eyes glowed with calm loyalty. Martha leaned back, eyes softening as sunlight spilled across the floor. Winter's harsh, she murmured, but it doesn't stay forever. Ethan nodded, gently scratching Ranger behind the ear. And in that quiet kitchen, framed by the glittering lake and the soft hum of the heater, Winterdale no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like a beginning. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't arrive with thunder or bright light. Sometimes they come quietly, in the shape of a loyal dog, a brave son, or a neighbor who finally finds the courage to do what is right. And sometimes God sends his miracles through the most ordinary people, a mother who waits with faith, a son who returns at the exact moment he's needed most, a town that rediscovers its strength and its heart. In our everyday lives, we often overlook the small blessings, a warm home, a safe morning, a helping hand that arrives just in time. But stories like this remind us, God's protection is never far, and his timing is always perfect. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that God's light is still present even in the coldest winter, please share this video to spread hope. Leave a comment saying, Amen, if you believe God watches over every family. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss another healing, uplifting story. May God bless you and your loved ones, today, tomorrow, and every quiet miracle waiting on the road ahead.